welcome to the Two Unlikely Christians podcast. I always want to say two live, but that was actually kind of a nasty rap group back in the '80s. So we're not two live group. We're two unlikely Christian podcast. Kind of unveiling my past there a little bit. I'm comedian Pat McCool, and now to the brains of our duo, all the way
Thank you.
across the Atlantic Ocean to somewhere in England, the main man, Richard Turrell.
Thanks, Pat. Nice to see you, man. Nice to see you.
You're
I'm
doing
glad you
good.
said that about me being the brains of the operation. It's, one of those things I've thought many times, but I'm glad that it's out in the open now. Yeah.
I'm very perceptive, and as I told my wife, between your education, all your degrees, and my GED, we're pretty sophisticated and rounded out here with our education. So we're combining here. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm more than happy to assign you the brains of the outfit. And speaking of on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, we are now up to 8 different countries. We just had Germany checking in with a place called Gießen, Hesse, Germany. We'd like to welcome them in. You ever been to Germany, Rich?
I have. I've been to Berlin.
You've
Yeah,
been to
been to
Berlin?
Berlin.
Do you know that I actually lived in Germany?
Did you? Oh,
At one,
what, with your dad's military moving about?
yeah, yeah. I lived there when I was 2, but I don't really, when I'm trying to act a little cosmopolitan and international, I don't always say that. So I tell, people are talking, "Oh, I've been to Rome. Oh, I've been to Rome. I've been to Paris. I've been to, yeah, I've been all over Europe." But what I don't tell them that I was 2 years old, and my mother had me wearing a pair of lederhosen, and I looked like a cartoon character.
Are
Yeah.
there any pictures? Are there pictures,
I,
Pat?
I,
That's
I do have pictures. Honest to gosh, I will find a picture of me in
right.
Germany and I will send it to you. I'll tell you where I get busted is where it's like, "Have you been to Paris?" "Oh, I've been to Paris." And I don't tell them I'm 2. And they're like, "Well, what was your favorite restaurant?" Just, so I'm a little, McDonald's. I don't know. I'm pretty stumped. The, uh,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
only, the only recollection of a restaurant that I have of all my time in Europe was we were in Italy and we were up in some mountains. My grandparents had come over and we were just taking a vacation and up in the mountains, maybe I guess the Alps, whatever they call them. My grandfather, who grew up, was born and raised in Jackson County, Mississippi, Escatawba, Mississippi, about 90 miles south of here. And we have a saying over here: you can take the boy out of Mississippi, but you can't take Mississippi out of the boy. Because my grandfather sat down and the Italian waiter came up. He spoke in a little broken English. My grandfather couldn't read the menu, and frustratingly, he closes the menu, sets it down, looks up at the waiter, and said, "I'll have a bologna sandwich, and Sally here, my grandmother, Sally here will have a milk of magnesia." That was our experience. That was my lasting memory in an Italian restaurant. So, but
A cultural triumph, Pat. It sounds like.
it was.
Yeah,
Yeah, it definitely
like a
was. Although I do think I left my mark in Europe because I was in hospitals in 3 different countries because once my brother tripped me going upstairs in Holland and I busted my chin and that burst open. And then in Italy, I ran through in a grocery store. I was trying to tackle my brother, and he did a Spanish bullfighter and just olayed me into the produce section, and that split my head open. And then back in Germany, I once drank a good portion of a bottle of Mr. Clean cleaning fluid, and they had to take me to the hospital and
why?
pump that. You know what? We're about to get into this. Inner child. I have no clue. Why? You read my book. Why did I do all this? Why did I do all the others? Oh, the Mr. Clean looked like
Yeah.
lemonade.
Oh, I see. I thought it was like I don't know, like a cry for help or something.
Well, I'm 2. I really did.
I don't know. Like,
I hadn't really built up a lot of, I hadn't really built, yeah, I'm letting my parents know this life is not working out for me. I can't take the rejection. I'm not getting the love I need. I'm going right down there and I'm
yeah.
crawling up in the cleaning fluid aisle and I'm down in a bottle of Mr. Clean because they haven't figured out they need to put childproof caps on this yet. And I got about 4 or 5 gulps in me, and then I was being having my stomach pumped at a local
Do you
German
not
hospital.
like if I imagine a 2-year-old drinking a bottle of cleaning fluid, right? I see it and like I see the child taking the first sip, realizing it's not lemonade, and then they maybe they spit out the lemonade, the cleaning fluid, or like some they stop crying, something happens, but you continue to drink the cleaning fluid. Is this correct,
Yes,
Patrick?
yeah, somehow I got enough in me to have to go to the hospital. I've wondered that myself. I thought like, well, once it hit my lips, didn't I just kind of spit it out? I, I was 2. I don't remember. I do know, my parents can vouch, they had to haul me to the emergency room. So obviously I got a few gulps of cleaning
Oh, I
fluid.
believe it happened, Pat. I believe it happened. I'm just curious as to what was going
I,
what was going on in that little 2-year-old mind. Yeah.
Yeah, you're the same as me. Every time I recount the story, I'm like, how did I keep drinking? You'd think it'd hit the lips, and I'd be like, okay, this isn't lemonade. We're gonna move on to something else. Maybe we'll go, for a floor cleaner or something. But I almost did it. But I did somehow survive childhood, which is a good segue into what we're going to talk about today.
Hit it, Pat.
Uh,
Take it away.
your LinkedIn post, and as you know, this is something that I'm very interested in because when you and I first met in our first conversation, when we discovered that we had a passion for helping others, and I told you in addition to comedy, I did public speaking and things. I'd always thought about the people carrying their childhood with them. I always thought so many problems in people's lives come from what happened to them in childhood, and we briefly mentioned it in that, and we mentioned it during the episode on addiction. And what we're going to do is I'm going to read this. This is off LinkedIn that Richard has posted. We've got 3 posts here. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them. Um, and remember that this is Richard's clinical take because this all comes from his clinical practice as a psychotherapist and addiction specialist. I always tie in the stuff that happened in childhood as the devil's way of continuing to come in and pound you. But you have this from a clinician perspective from the people that you've worked with. And I've always thought that, well, I know for a fact Jesus uses the clinical experience and therapy to help people
Yeah.
that I have a very good friend here in Hattiesburg, Dr. Beverly Smilewood. She is a psychologist. I don't know the difference between the two of you, but I think it's very similar. She is a sold out follower and believer of Jesus, but she has the clinical practice that she helps an awful lot of people. So I think people could get a lot of help from this. So I am going to read the very first post you said. And the word clinical, inner child, if anybody my age is a man is listening to this, don't click away because we had the inner child thing going on in America years ago. We talked about it, but it kind of had a stigma. It was kind of like uh, oh, just get over it and grow up type
Mm,
thing. But as I've gotten older, the term really does work because it is, or that there are things from your childhood that are carrying with you. And I've always thought that you may leave childhood, but it never leaves you. And that's all of it. So let's read this. Why the title is Why Inner Child Work Matters in Addiction Recovery. This is part 1 of a 3-part series detailing my approach of using inner child and somatic trauma therapy together working with suitable addiction patients. Trauma informed practitioners understand addiction is not as a moral failing, but as a survival strategy, a coping mechanism rooted in unresolved childhood pain. For many, addictive behaviors are driven by emotional wounds carried by the inner child, a part of the psyche that holds our earliest experiences of fear, vulnerability, and unmet needs. Eddie Caparucci,
Aparici,
a
yeah.
Caparucci, a therapist known for his work with sex and pornography addiction, developed the inner child model for addiction recovery. This model identifies the unmet emotional needs of a wounded inner child as the driver behind compulsive behaviors. Having trained with Eddie and his co-author Nathan Jones, I found this model to be transformative in helping clients reconnect with these wounded parts of themselves. Recovery in this framework means learning how to identify your dominant inner child archetypes and developing an emotionally literate, compassionate adult self that can reparent and soothe them. In my synthesized approach, alongside these valuable insights and new parts of responding to disowned parts of oneself, I work with the body. In post two, I'll explore the somatic side of this work and how this approach allows contact not only with the trauma that lives in the mind but in the nervous system. So, if you could just elaborate from there.
Yeah, of course, Pat. Thanks for reading that out. And so I mean, I guess I'll pick up on something you said right at the front end there about, the stigma that can be attached to inner child work. And it's really interesting, often, and I still come across it now. Um, there's that idea that we should just get over it, that it's a fallacy. What do you mean inner child? I'm a man or a woman, like, and so we can be quite self-rejecting of a part of us that is, an early part of us that's wounded, that's hurt. And we all carry, that kind of younger part of ourselves. All the major schools of psychology agree now that, and all the minor ones, that we all have different parts of ourselves. Like no, no one's just, there's not a single personality, right? So we carry these younger parts of ourselves, but so also often there's this idea, this tendency to like reject that part of ourselves. And the interesting thing is, I think that the way that we relate to our inner child will usually mirror the way that we were treated as children. So if someone is rejecting that idea and rejecting that part of themselves, then that's probably what happened when they were a kid. Yeah. And often I think the people that reject these ideas the hardest are the people that need them the most. So I think there's something in that. The idea of the inner child is not that we actually carry a child. There is a child inside of us, obviously, that it's not what it is. But what the inner child idea does is it pulls together a lot of more complicated psychological ideas, and it packages them together in a very useful metaphor. Yeah, a very useful metaphor. And so that kind of construct allows us to start to relate to ourselves in different ways. That would be my opener there, Pat.
You, uh, and I have always thought, um, as I've said, that so much of what goes on in our lives all goes back to childhood. If you were rejected as a child, you're expecting to be rejected. If you had trauma, I didn't really have trauma. You had trauma. Let me ask you this, Chris, we're getting into the fall. You had trauma in your life. What kind of are you a big fan of Christmas, for example?
Not really.
Okay,
Not really.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to go any farther because you just made my point. Here's the point that I was going to make. I knew you were going to say this because when I talked to somebody, see, I loved Christmas because I didn't have the childhood trauma. A lot of the stuff that I got into happened later on in life, and or as I became a teenager and bad decisions. But you had trauma in my life, and I knew how you were going to answer this question. People that aren't big Christmas people, you can pretty much tell they had trauma in their lives as a child. See, the whole Christmas season comes to me or and my wife and you, it's full of great memories and fond memories. It's not for you. It's because you had trauma with the parents. You had parents drinking. You had divorce and you didn't feel all of that comfort and joy and everything at Christmas time. Um, I've got people very close to me, a guy that just no, he doesn't like Christmas at all. He had a horrible father and a horrible childhood. So, one way I can just about tell if somebody had a good childhood or not by asking that one question. Did you have, do you remember the Christmas and the family thing that way? So you had that trauma. I knew how you were going to answer that question. But to broadly expand it, even to myself, I just remember I can be going down the road and something will pop in the head that happened, in the fifth grade. Was it a rejection? Was it, getting a tail whipping for something that I didn't do and understand why? Now, I did most of the stuff I got the tail whippings for. Trust me. But um, it's those little things that go with us. If were you rejected? Were you dumped by a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or something like that? Did somebody treat you badly? Those things all, I think, all stay in our heads. And to tie the spiritual realm into it, I think
Mm,
Satan uses all of that to beat us up all through life. You
mm.
said a lot in that post there that I was just noticing because I just skimmed through it. But there's so many things in there that he can use to destroy you. Not just an addiction. I think just people are just in, we talked about in the spiritual warfare podcast. I know people that as a child didn't, maybe get the love and that they should have, and they go through life expecting things in the subconsciously, expecting life to treat them that way. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, of course, man. A lot. I think that, the way I come to understand it since I came to Christ is, those wounds, those childhood wounds, the things that happen, traumas, all of those things, they kind of create the cracks in our psyche that the enemy gets into. I heard a brilliant sermon the other day, and the pastor was saying, he said, not everything, not every negative message you hear about yourself, not every dysfunctional thought, not every, difficult belief is an attack of the enemy. But it might just be that the enemy told you a lie 20 years ago that you still believe now. And I thought that was very powerful. So yeah, I think it all joins up somewhere. Look, a debate that I have quite often with Christian friends is this idea that, like, actually, well, like, if we're a new we're born again, we're saved, we're a new creation, right? So therefore everything, is we're washed clean, so therefore all past traumas, wounds, difficulties, addictions, compulsions, whatever, like, they're gone. And if they're not gone, then you're not saved. And I think that's really dangerous, actually. I think that sometimes God works through people, and that's the role that clinicians, like therapists like myself, can play. We can help people that need that little bit of extra help, that need some psychological input in order to get freedom from the kind of stuff that we're talking about, Pat. That pain, those fears, those negative beliefs, and the things that people do to escape from them. So yeah, that's what I think about all that.
I agree with you. That was the old thinking. And I also heard a pastor saying, in the way we were thinking, it used to be once you become a Christian, once you follow Jesus, we discussed this in spiritual warfare episode that, oh, everything should be great. Well, if I have a broken arm and I accept Jesus, he's probably going to make it possible for me to get to a doctor and get that broken arm fixed.
Yeah,
You follow what I'm saying?
yeah,
That's not
100%.
just
Yeah,
not just touch my hand and go. It's so much deeper. And I think that's very dangerous thinking. You've accepted Jesus, you're born again, you're saved, and everything should be fine. I know people that are Christians that have killed themselves. That they just life just tormented them and tormented them. You can listen to the devil. You cannot be following Jesus or not getting the help that you need. I know people that are alcoholics that are sold out followers of Jesus. They attend these meetings. They attend AA meetings constantly. They need that help. They need the therapy. They need the clinical help, the books that you read on it. So I totally agree with that. That is pretty brilliant what he said. It's not all intact, but it could be something that he put in your head that stays with you. My wife and I were having a conversation the other day. I don't even know what it was about. An album, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Four-Way Street. You're a little too young to have the best generation of music, Rich. I don't know what you listen to, but you're right behind the '60s and '70s. Most of it came out of Britain, and I've given you credit for. But I had this great album, and we were talking about it. And I was like, yeah, I was playing the song, and I said, yeah, I don't have this anymore because my brother told me his friend broke it. And then I started thinking, I was like, you know what? I bet his friend didn't break it. Mike probably broke it because he was always lying to me. And 10 minutes later, I'm talking about Mike taking my headphones, tearing my headphones up. And I start thinking, and I can feel myself actually thinking about that moment in childhood when my brother was being an abusive brother to me. Uh, and I just think that if that's little stuff like that is always in our head. If you're somebody that maybe was bullied as a child, that was rejected, that was, um, that had failings, had fears as a child, didn't feel love as a child, I think that stays with you for the rest of your life. I think
Yeah,
you're
it 100% does, right? And it doesn't have to, but like you will carry it with you. And like we have all these, and look, to some extent, we're supposed to, like the way that we view the world, the way that we view our place in it, the way that we view others within the world, right? The way that we view ourselves. It's forged in childhood. It's supposed to be. That's where we learn how to, how to engage with the world. Right? But sometimes there's too much adversity. There's too much difficulty. There's too much, things like rejection and abandonment. We all experience that to one degree or another, right? There's nothing exempts us from that. But when there's too much, it gets lodged. It gets stuck and it causes this kind of psychic pain, this intrapersonal conflict. And then so often for the people that I meet, in my practice, they're the ones who the way they found to cope is through drugs, through addictive sex, through alcohol, through, gambling, whatever it might be, right? Because it somehow soothes the pain. And it's funny because that works different for different people. If you look at heroin addicts, so I was a heroin addict, right? Among other things. But a heroin addict, often what was missing was comfort and nurture. Yeah. Because heroin is, there's it's just this, certainly at first, this immense sense of comfort and ease, right? If you look at a cocaine addict, often what they were lacking was stimulation. Yeah. Um, so it's the drug that someone chooses will often reflect what was missing in childhood. That's a very interesting thing. The nickname for heroin, certainly in this country, one of the old school nicknames for heroin was called Mother's Love. Yeah, Mother's Love. Yeah, yeah.
that was a revelation what you said, because as I told you, I never did the heroin. I never did the heroin because it never showed up in my town, because as a teenager I was doing everything, but I did the cocaine. And I've told you before, I had mother's love. I'm the guy that loved Christmas. I had the mother's love, the dad taking me to the ball game, and my dad was a little bit of a hard case, but I had that growing up. But you just said something I never thought about. The one that goes for the cocaine, which I did, as we've discussed, is looking for stimulation.
Well, I have a thought, Patrick, I could share with you if you would be interested about your story. Yeah.
Go
And
ahead.
you tell me what you think, like I'm willing to be wrong, right? But there was lots of love in your house. I've read your book and we talk and stuff, and we talk on here and we talk off air and all that stuff, right? So you grew up, there was love, lots of mum, your mum was loving, your father was present and attentive. Um, you sometimes refer to your dad as a bit of a hard case, and he was a military man, right? So I would guess some rules, some regulations, like some probably quite rigid, strict boundaries in the house growing up. Yeah. And then everything about how things developed for you was the opposite of that. Rebellious, messy, yeah, like extreme, yeah, chaos. Yeah. I kind of think that everything that you did was a reaction to that rigidity. Yeah. And yeah, I think the cocaine for you probably was because it was there and it was an act of rebellion, you know. And of course, once you've injected a drug like that, it's extremely addictive and you did well to get away from it. But that would be my formulation of what you experienced. What do you make of that?
Chills when you said it. It's like that never really hit me. You know, that's why I said I always like talking about this because I'm always trying to think back in the childhood, but I didn't experience that trauma. And I think you may have just gone right over the target because that's what I was doing. You said, why did you drink the Mr. Clean? I was always rebelling. And I was the third. I had an older brother, second older brother, two older brothers, and then I was little Pookie. And if you ever look into quite often, the little number three, little Pookie will be the salesman, which I was. I was a top salesman with the insurance company I was in. I was a top performing executive with that insurance company.
Mhm.
And then I quit and I became a comedian. They end up in the entertainment business or something. Um, I think you're exactly right. It was rebelling. I was just constantly, creating the chaos. I can remember somebody asking my brother, like, "What is wrong with Pat? He has everything, and then the next thing you know, he has everything going for him, but." Last night he went out and ran his car into a tree. Or last night he doesn't need food, but him and his friend just got caught burglarizing a convenience store. So I think you just nailed the head. You just hit the nail on the head.
But
So you never.
and an interesting point that comes out of that, which is really important, I think, for for the listeners, is like it don't like it doesn't have to be like an obvious like trauma, like abuse, violence, neglect, growing up with alcoholism, sexual abuse. It doesn't have to be those things. Sometimes it's much more subtle. Sometimes it's much more subtle. But like, oh, we can usually find the roots of dysfunctional behaviour in back in childhood because all of that behavior, it all serves a purpose. This is a really important point, right? It's like I know we're going all over the place a little bit, but I think it's valuable, right? It's like all of that behavior serves a purpose, right? Like in a really messy way, yeah. So for you, there, like I think anyway, and I'm not telling you, like, and I'm aware that we're kind of, potentially psychoanalyzing you on a podcast, right? But like, like that,
We,
yeah, there is that, like, that need for like rebellion, for messiness, for all of those kind of things, which are all like, a bit of chaos, which are all things that kids need some of that, right? Actually, how how a how a boy forms his identity as a man is by starting to push back, yeah, against the boundaries, right, and test them and where do they lie and what can I do. So like actually all of your acting out and all of the mad stuff that you got up to, like it all actually served a purpose. It did it in a way which was horrific, and like dangerous, yeah. But it all
that,
served its purpose. My drug addiction served a purpose. I was so full of like anxiety and self-loathing, that I needed something to take the edge off of that. And to be honest with you, if I hadn't become a drug addict, right, I think there's a very good chance I would have killed myself because what was going on inside of me was so painful. Yeah, so it all serves its purpose, right? All of these things we do, they serve their purpose. It's just sometimes they do it in a way which is so dysfunctional and destructive that it has to stop. It has to stop, man.
yeah, that's some insight. I never really thought of that. The light bulb went off when you said the cocaine is going for the charge, the other's going for the love. I've always wondered where the two were because there's a correlation, but there's a big difference there. And that's what I was looking for, the thrill.
Mm.
So I never really thought of that. While we have time, can I read part two real quick?
Yeah, let's give it a go, and we can always sort of talk about this at another, a bit
All right.
later on in our schedule.
Oh,
But let's give it a whirl.
okay, let me just do this real quick and we will see what the body remembers. The somatic side of addiction. Addiction is more than a mental pattern, it's in a bodily response to overwhelm. That's the core insight I gained from training with somatic trauma expert Babette Rothschild, author of The Body Remembers. When trauma occurs, the nervous system can get stuck in survival states: fight, flight, or freeze. In this state, the body no longer feels safe, even when the environment is. For many, addiction becomes a way to numb, escape, or artificially regulate this dysregulated system. Rothschild's trauma informed approach teaches that before diving into childhood memories of inner child work, clients must first learn to regulate their body. This means building awareness of sensations like shallow breathing, chest tightness, or restlessness without judgment. Once some degree of somatic safety is in place, can deeper psychological work, like inner child healing, proceed with the overwhelming the system. In part three, I'll share how combining these two frameworks, Caparucci's inner child work and Rothschild's somatic approach, creates a powerful path during long-term recovery. This sounds like you're kind of continuing on what you were saying. For many, addiction becomes a way to escape um, and artificially regulate the dysregulated system. So you're saying for a lot of people in addiction, they have a dysregulated system that's coming
Yeah,
from childhood.
yeah, most, most, if not all people in addiction, like it's an issue, it's an issue of emotional regulation in one way or another. People that they're really kind of down in a part of their nervous system that's like kind of should be for like calm and relaxation, but actually they've kind of dropped past that and they're into sort of being quite like, shut down, dissociated, disconnected. Or often people like they're up too high. They've gone into the part of their nervous system that's responsible for activity, for moving forward, for getting stuff done. Now they've shot kind of past that and they're into fight or flight, and so helping people to kind of be able to regulate their state and stay in that kind of, more the optimal parts of their nervous system is really key. And when you start to talk about and remember traumatic memories, right? Like then you people become dysregulated. So you have to be able to regulate. Like if you're going to dive into the kind of material that sometimes you have to look at during the inner child work. So you have to be able to help people regulate. Otherwise, actually, it just becomes kind of hurtful. It just becomes harmful. So part of the inner child process that I use, or use in the model that I'm talking about there, it is about helping people to start to put like a narrative together of their lives, why they've acted in certain ways, why they've thought in certain ways, why they've felt in certain ways. you know, it doesn't mean reliving every single event. It definitely doesn't need to be that. It shouldn't really be that. But it is about starting to, oh yeah, that relationship with mum, that was like that, and dad was like that, and that left me feeling like this. And actually that how that plays out for me today is that, right? But when you start getting into that kind of territory, it's dysregulating, So you need to be able to help people to regulate, okay, feel that whatever it is that's come up, regulate, 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 feel whatever's come up, regulate, 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 and then that way you can kind of move through the process, release some of the emotional charge, gain an understanding of the story. Also, you sort of teach people how they can manage their emotional state day to day, and that's where the magic, that's a big part of where the magic happens.
Do you think, I say this because I know people that are stressed out in life and they're quick to, it could be a woman that's got children and a husband and they always feel like they can't, they're always having to stress to kind of measure up. It goes back to childhood where uh, the parents were always, or the father was always giving them a hard time or not accepting the way. I'm not saying this correctly. I just think a lot of people that they still react as adults based on what they did as childhood. It could be from the parents, or I didn't measure up, I guess what I'm trying to say. People that say I didn't measure up, I know people that do that. They've they were told or made to feel like they didn't measure up when they were young, and now that they're old, the same thing is still there. It's like I've got to do this for my husband, I got to do this for my spouse, I've got to always be perfect, because it goes all the way back to childhood, not getting that approval not getting that love and that type of thing. Do you think I'm on to something there?
Yeah, I think it's very accurate. Yeah, it's very accurate. Yeah. I mean, look, this stuff comes in, it's been spoken about for years in different ways, core beliefs, internal drivers and injunctions, you can draw on lots of different sort of schools of thoughts. You've got internal family systems now. Um, there's all sorts of lots of different schools of psychology have looked at this in this sort of material with slightly different emphases, with slightly different terminology, with some philosophical differences. Um, I go all the way back to Freud, with the ego and the superego, and Jung with his archetypes, the two like godfathers of modern psychotherapy. But inner child is what we're talking about. And inner child, yeah, it's about how the unconscious mind is impacted by the events of childhood when the personality is forming, and those play out in our adult lives in ways that we're not aware of. And sometimes one of the simplest definitions of therapy, which really captures what it is in a nutshell, is making the unconscious conscious. Because if the unconscious becomes conscious, and all of a sudden we understand why we're acting in certain ways, why we feel in certain ways, why we think in certain ways, then we can do something about it. And if we aren't aware of it, then we can't. We're just kind of caught in the currents and eddies of our underlying psychology, and that can be a very painful place to be. Like the woman who keeps ending up in a relationship with the same man but with a different face.
Yes.
Like, the person who, regardless of what they achieve, they never ever feel good enough. They always feel like a fraud. They always feel like they're going to get caught out. You know, the person who fears rejection constantly, even though there's no evidence that they are going to be rejected. All of these things can play out again and again and again and again and again, and they can change, life from living to existing or surviving, and that's very sad.
I think that's a good way to leave it there. I think you're exactly right. So they keep playing out, they keep creating the reality by what's going on in their subconscious mind, and it's just something that I've always thought that you carry all of that throughout your childhood,
Yeah.
and you take it out on a lot of people. If you've been rejected, if you were rejected at a young age, you're not going to be as trusting to somebody that might has earned your trust. You're always thinking that could happen to you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I mean, look, one thing I want to say before we end, Pat, is so for me, like, really, I did a lot of therapy. I did many years of therapy. I continued to struggle long after I got clean. I found Jesus, and like, like coming to faith it was like the missing ingredient. It was like the missing ingredient, and all of a sudden things fell into place. I got touched, I got healed. I was washed clean, and actually that look, therapy helped, but it was still always a struggle. Meeting Jesus, everything started to change. And the therapies have been a really important part of that picture, and it continues to be a really important part of the picture. But without Jesus, it's like for me, and I often think this: the more troubled amongst us, Pat, yeah, psychology on its own, it will only take you so far. So yeah, this is none of what we're talking about today is an alternative to Jesus, but it is a good add-on.
yeah, bringing out that you have a clinical take on what happens in our childhood that I think Satan uses
Yeah,
over and over to
over and
constantly
over.
torment us. And that's what's so interesting to talk to you. You had the physical addiction. Actually, you have provided a free analyzation of me today because I got chills when you said that. I was like, well, that does make sense. I was one that was searching for this thrill, but I will tell you that because everyone's different. When I became a true follower of Jesus, I was healed. I mean, boom. I started following God. So, see, I didn't have that physical addiction. So, you and I come from different backgrounds. It changed. First, I decided I was going to follow God as you read my book. I became a believer in my mind. That's a whole different episode becoming a Christian and becoming a real follower of Jesus. But I became a Christian, and all of a sudden, doing the bad stuff, I didn't want to do it. But when I became a follower of Jesus, I was healed from it. I heard Alice Cooper, you know what I'm talking about, right? Alice
The
Cooper,
musician.
the musician. Yeah,
Yeah.
he said, when I came to Jesus, I was just healed. And I was myself, but one size doesn't fit all. I know people that are sold out followers of Jesus. They've got to be in these 12 steps. They've got to be. They need the therapy. They need the help. So that's why we like to combine the two in our conversation. Again, the friend of mine that I'd like for you to meet one day, when you come back to Mississippi, Dr. Beverly Smallwood. She is a sold out follower of Jesus, but her practice is all about bringing people the therapy, the help, and everything just like you do.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's very important. And the key is, I will tell you, the thing with me and you, when it comes right down to it, we were incredibly miserable people. And we, in our first conversation, realized that we were filled with joy, filled with peace, filled with happiness, and there was one common denominator: Jesus. Although we didn't know it during the conversation. We didn't know it until we had a conversation, till we had a conversation later on. So I don't think it was an accident that we started having a conversation. But um, I've just always thought that. I know people, and I can just tell by their reactions. And a lot of times, just like my question about Christmas, a lot of what their troubles they have in their life doesn't have to be addiction. It could be troubles in marriage or aggravations and things. It all can spurn back to what happened when they were in childhood. But for me, because so many people had the rejection. I've told you before, I got dumped by girlfriends a couple of times, and that kind of stuck with me. I had no idea that God was playing the long game, and he had this woman that I never thought I could ever in a million years have a wife like I have. But I
Yeah.
was destroyed back then. And when I met my wife, I'm like, yeah, it's probably just a matter of time before this is going to blow up on me. Uh, but being the woman of God she was, it more and more realized, no, this is the person that God had for me. But Jesus had a plan for my life. Go ahead, you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, it's it because there's that, it's like, look, God works all things for good, right? But then we know
Right.
that the enemy, he's here. He walks around like a roaring lion looking to devour us, right? And
Yes.
sometimes it's, I see that as a stumbling point for many coming into faith. It's like, well, why did I have to suffer the way that I suffered? Like, why me? And I think it's complicated, right? It's like, well, we know that the enemy's doing what the enemy's doing, right? But then also, I think at the same time, almost paradoxically, and for me, God worked all those things for good. So the enemy does what he does, but if we're able to kind of like have faith and kind of embrace Jesus, then we can be kind of healed and redeemed and transformed. And then actually all of those painful experiences, I wouldn't be sat, I don't know what I'd be doing, but maybe I'd be working in a bank or something, who knows, but like I wouldn't be doing what I was doing unless I'd been through what I'd been through. I wouldn't be able to help people unless I'd experienced what I'd experienced. I wouldn't be able to help them the way that I help them now, so he does work all things for good, but that can still involve a lot of suffering because we live in a fallen world, sadly, and there's, the minions of darkness are, they're amongst us and they're very real, so it's a complicated picture, but yeah, there we go.
To close on that, actually, my struggle has been one of the greatest blessings, which is a whole nother podcast. If you come through the struggle, and if you've seen the dark, you've seen the struggle, you've seen the misery, then you have the joy and the peace that Jesus can bring you. I enjoy everything I do now. I mean, it's just, I never would have been that. I was the guy that you just psychoanalyzed 20 minutes ago. That I might have been searching for the excitement because I kind of was. I always needed, so I would sit in school going, this is killing me. I need to go outside and break a window or something. But after going through all of those struggles, I just have peace. I have joy. I can sit by myself. I love solitude. I love just sitting around where before it was like I had to be doing something. You were going to have one final thought.
Well, it's nothing major, Pat. We could have discussed this off air, but I was going to say, should I send the invoice to your email? or shall I
Yes.
WhatsApp it to you?
Yeah, so, yeah, send it to my people, and I will have them. Hey, could you guys cut Richard a three-party post-dated check and get it in the mail across the pond? It was very valuable, Rich. It truly was, and I
That's
hope
a
what
pleasure.
we have talked about today is valuable to our growing audience. So, all right, Rich, appreciate you checking in with me today. I know you had to kind of squeeze in there because you've had a busy weekend. So, I will see you next week. And to everybody out there, God bless you all.
God bless you all.